All right, 12:32.
Okay, should we begin?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, thank you everyone who is here for coming to our webinar on extended eligibility for 21-year-olds during COVID-19. Or specifically be focusing on students who are aging out this current school year, 2020, 2021. So we're going to go ahead and introduce ourselves and then we will get started. So my name is Juliet Eisenstein. I am an attorney and fellow at Advocates for Children in our post-secondary readiness project, and pass it off to my colleagues.
Hi, my name is Ashley Grant, and I'm also an attorney on the post-secondary readiness project here at Advocates for Children.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Laura Dean Pierre. I am a social worker on the post-secondary readiness project here at Advocates for Children. So who are we? Advocates for Children is an independent organization that protects the rights of all students in New York City. We were founded in 1971 by parents with students with disabilities. And over the years, our mission has expanded. We serve all types of populations within the education system. And on the screen, you'll see our helpline number and our website to get to know some of the resources that we have and see all the other great things that we're doing here at AFC. So now that you know a little bit about us, we just want to know who's here with us. So I'm going to launch a quick poll to see who's in the room with us. Three more seconds. The last few people get there. All right. Who's in the room? So most of our participants today are professionals, so welcome. And the majority of you are from outside of the city. So thank you and welcome here. Right. So what our agenda is going to look like today. This is how we're going to be spending this next hour. The first half of today's training will focus on New York State, and the second half will be more specific to New York City. We'll be letting you know when we switch over to the New York City, so the folks outside of the city, you can hop off if you wish, or just get to know what's happening in the city as well. We'll be taking questions throughout. There are going to be breaks within our presentation for questions specifically, and you have the Q&A function available to you. So please put all of your questions in that Q&A section. Today's webinar is being recorded, and after the recording, after today's training, we'll be sharing the recording, and so please be on the lookout for that, as well as for a copy of today's slides with the links that we show. All right. So New Yorkers have the right to stay in school until they earn a diploma or until after their 21st birthday. A diploma means a Regents or a local diploma. Some students with disabilities are working toward non-diploma credentials. These credentials are not diplomas, so receiving one does not end a student's right to remain in school. Most students' eligibility to stay in school ends when they earn a Regents, a local, or advanced Regents diploma. Statewide, about 95% of graduates do so in 4 years, but so many students need more time. Students who need more time are often more likely to be Black, Latinx, or English language learners, or students with disabilities. We'll be talking more about this in greater detail in a few slides. So there are a few terms that we want to make clear because you're going to hear us mentioning them throughout today's presentation. First one is aging out. Aging out means students generally lose the right to attend high school after the end of the school year in which they turn 21. Statewide, 3,700 students turned 21 during the 1920 school year, and those who did not earn a diploma aged out in June 2020. The second term that we want you to know is extended eligibility. This means in certain circumstances, schools offer students the opportunity to stay in school after the end of the school year in which they turn 21. Because of COVID, many high school students, through no fault of their own, struggled to really access remote learning in the months since school buildings were closed. Many didn't receive full course credit for the semester. And for example, some students don't have access to high-speed internet or computers, or students who are living in shelters or overcrowded apartments lacked a quiet spot to study, or older youth who might have been working to support their families or spending their days caring for younger siblings, leaving them with no time to focus on their schoolwork. This webinar will describe the students eligible for extended eligibility due to COVID-19 and some tips for accessing extended eligibility.
So as Laura Dean briefly mentioned before, 74% of students aging out in June 2020 were Black or Latinx, though Black and Latinx students comprise only 44% of the total high school population. So these students are disproportionately impacted by the school closures. And these statistics are statewide. These are statistics from last school year, the 2019-2020 school year, but these percentages are pretty steady year after year, and you can see a more thorough breakdown on the right-hand side of the slide. And then in addition, nearly half of New York State students aging out are students with disabilities, and 1 in 3 students aging out is learning English as a new language. And again, these are statewide numbers. And what this tells us is that even before the pandemic, students who age out without a diploma are disproportionately students of color, students with disabilities, and English language learners. And these are some of the same populations that have been hardest hit by the pandemic itself and by the challenges of online and hybrid learning. Last spring, when COVID interrupted the last 4 months of many students' senior year, Deputy Commissioner John Deagagi issued a memo, which you can see up here. It's quoted, he strongly encouraging schools and school districts to allow those students who will age out of school the opportunity for this year only to return for summer school and, if necessary, attend school in the 2020-2021 year in order to complete their education and earn a diploma. In this letter, the Deputy Commissioner Deagagi also says that it would be a cruel injustice to pull the rug out from under these young adults who have worked so hard for so long, and that giving them the opportunity to complete their schooling, earn a diploma, and transition to the next steps in their lives will benefit them, their families, and communities in which they live and work. And we urge you to offer them that opportunity. So showing that the state education department identified last year the need for so many students who are aging out to be able to return the following school year to get the services that they need to be prepared to exit high school. So what happened after this letter was issued? So following that June 2020 memo, districts allowed many students to return for the 2020-2021 school year. In New York City alone, over 400 students did return. Still, some families and students never learned about the opportunity to return to school the following year, and some eligible families were never even notified that they were eligible to return, even though the state ed's guidance applied to them. Districts across New York State also declined some requests for students to return. And this especially impacted students whose IEPs mandate state-approved non-public school programs, which are sometimes referred to as out-of-district placements. So students whose IEPs mandated those programs had a much harder time being able to return for this school year. And many of them aged out without the ability to come back to school and work on the curriculum and programming that they missed out on during school closures. Okay, and then now fast forward to this year. On April 13th of 2021, New York State Ed Department issued a similar memo to the one last year. Again, strongly encouraging schools and school districts to allow those students who will age out of school the opportunity to return for summer school and, if necessary, attend school in the 2021-2022 school year in order to complete their education and earn a diploma, credential, or endorsement. Like last year, districts can decide whether to follow this state ed guidance and offer more time to students who need it. What this shows is that state ed's again identifying that as schools continued to remain closed and offering remote learning this year, there's still a great need for a lot of students aging out this school year to be able to return for next school year.
So advocacy efforts in this area are ongoing. Last year, students in different districts, for example, were often treated differently. So I'm sorry, like last year, students in different districts may be treated differently. So for example, this year, we've already been hearing that districts like Carmel have announced they will allow all students who need more time to continue, but many districts nearby have not done so. In other areas, we're hearing that some students will be told that they will be able to come back, but others, including those placed in out-of-district schools, have been either told no or awaiting ultimate decisions on whether they can return next year. The New York City Department of Education, for example, has said publicly that any student who may be aging out this year can attend their summer program and continue their education next year. And we will talk more in the second half of the program about what we know about New York City's policy. But you can help by sharing this memo and urging districts around New York State to notify families immediately that 21-year-olds may remain in high school. Like Juliet said, the memo is optional for districts, but there's sort of a strong moral imperative given to districts by New York State Education Department. So you can help by sharing that memo. We are also asking elected officials to support legislation extending school eligibility for students with IEPs, so students with disabilities, through age 23. The New York State Assembly and the New York State Senate have both introduced legislation that would actually require school districts to provide educational and support services to students with disabilities until they turn 23. This bill covers students who would otherwise age out of school this year, as well as students who aged out last year, so during the 1920 school year. And we give students with disabilities specifically a guarantee that they have the right to earn a high school diploma or meet their transition goals in light of COVID-19. So following this presentation, when you receive this slide deck, you can click on this link and you can send a quick email to your state legislators and ask them to support the legislation expanding school eligibility for students with disabilities from age 21 to 23. Parents advocating for this bill are also organizing a Zoom forum next week, and a link to register for the Zoom event will also be sent to you with the PowerPoint to this presentation. Additionally, Advocates for Children coordinates a statewide coalition of more than 80 members who have been advocating for more equitable pathways to graduation, including extended eligibility for students with disabilities. To join the coalition or to learn more about us, when you receive this slide deck, you can click on the link to the Coalition for Multiple Pathways to a Diploma. Then, Juliet, do you want to take the next one?
Yeah, sorry, I was struggling to unmute myself. So next steps for New York State families. if you are, working with or have a student who is at risk of aging out this school year, talk to your school, share the NYSED memo, the New York State Ed memo linked on this slide to ask for more time. You can also talk to your CSE, the Committee on Special Education for your school district or your school superintendent. And parents of students with disabilities can also request an impartial hearing for extended eligibility to request more time. And we will get into that more on the next slide. You're muted, Lardine.
Yep. If your district doesn't agree to give your child with a disability more time or the special education supports they need, you can request an impartial hearing. So all parents of students with disabilities have the right to request an impartial hearing to ask for more time in high school. Parents of students with disability always have the right to request an impartial hearing when they don't think that their school is providing or has provided a free and appropriate public education. If your child has a disability and hasn't gotten the special education supports they need to meet graduation requirements or their transition goals, you can request the impartial hearing to ask your district to give your child makeup services or more time in high school. Some parents will need to request an impartial hearing to get more time in high school because of this guidance from NYSED, from the New York State Education Department. We hope that parents with students with disabilities don't need to make this request for a hearing to get more time for their children. But if you're seeking more time in a unilateral placement at a private school, or you've asked for more time and your school district says no, or hasn't given you an answer, you might need to request an impartial hearing to get more time. You can work with an attorney to request an impartial hearing, and we recommend this. However, you can also request the hearing yourself. You can request an impartial hearing yourself by filling out a 2 to 3 page form. If you click the link by the mouse icon, AFC has a tip sheet for parents requesting hearings themselves. The tip sheet includes suggestions for things to think about and sample language that you can use when describing the problem, as well as solutions you can consider asking for. AFC cannot provide legal assistance to individuals outside of New York City, but feel free to reach out to us and we'll put our email address in the chat for information about the process or for referral to a PTIC in your area. Finally, after school or if your school or district agrees to more time, it is a good idea to talk to your school about updating your child's transition plan. So in light of last year, how we want you to think about if any of your child's needs or goals have changed. And so some of the places that you want to think about it is like, their instruction needs, have they changed? The needs in regards to their related services, the community experiences, their job goals, their daily living skills. Because of COVID, you want to consider how COVID has impacted any of these areas and make sure that their transition plan reflects the changes that have happened or reflects their new needs in these areas.
All right, so we've got some questions in the chat. One of the questions is ultimately who decides extended eligibility. So as Juliet explained, the New York State Education Department has left it up to individual districts to decide whether or not they're going to extend eligibility to students who aged out this year. So in most cases, it's ultimately going to be up to the individual school district to decide whether to follow the New York State Education Department's memo and to award a student or give a student the opportunity to return next year. Laura Dean also spoke about requesting an impartial hearing. So students with disabilities, parents of students with disabilities, have the right to file an impartial hearing request anytime they disagree with the provision of a free and appropriate public education to their child with a disability. In those instances, if a parent files or requests an impartial hearing, then an impartial hearing officer appointed by New York State will make the ultimate decision about whether the school district has to provide extended eligibility to a student. Unfortunately, the impartial hearing process is only available to students with disabilities, and as Susan notes in the questions, it can take a long time to get an impartial hearing. When parents file an impartial hearing, we encourage parents to file an impartial hearing request as soon as possible if their school district, if they have a student with disability and they've been declined additional time. We also encourage parents to assert what is called pendency or stay put, and to ask for the district to provide the special education services their child has been receiving while they wait for that hearing. And in some instances, we have seen hearing officers here in New York City award that pendency. We're happy to talk to you more about our experience and to provide you information about this option if you reach out to us. At our phone number is at the end. You can also always email us, as we'll distribute this information, but you can email us at agingout@advocatesforchildren.org for details about the impartial hearing process. Then after that, I think we are ready to move on. So we are now moving on to the New York City portion of this webinar. So folks who are outside of the city are more than welcome to stay, but our feelings will not be hurt if you jump off. So in New York City, what happened in this school year, in the 2020-2021 school year? So following last year's New York State Education Department memo, the New York City Department of Education did offer extended eligibility to many students. And as Juliet mentioned, over 400 students returned to school this year after having aged out. The New York City this year extended eligibility to students who fell into three different buckets. Students who were finishing their diploma requirements, so students with and without disabilities whose principals determined that they had time to finish if they returned in 2020-2021, that they could earn a high school diploma. New York City this year also extended eligibility to students who had aged out, who had IEPs recommending alternate assessment or New York State alternate assessments. In these instances, the determination about whether to extend eligibility to a student who was working toward a non-diploma credential was whether the student had met their IEP goals and whether there were signs of regression. Additionally, New York City also this year offered transition consultation services, whether or not students had graduated. It offered these services to aging out students on a one-to-one basis until those students were connected with either adult or post-secondary services. So the New York City did a really nice job of extending eligibility to a number of different groups of students. Unfortunately, this year, New York City declined to extend eligibility to students attending state-approved non-public schools. So those students whose IEPs had placed them or recommended a state-approved private school. In many instances, we're initially told that they could stay, but then New York City declined to fund those placements. So now we'll move on. That was all that last year. So this year, following this year's New York State Education Department memo, New York City said publicly in a Chalkbeat article, any student who may be aging out this year can attend our Summer Rising program and continue their education into the 2021-2022 school year. The Summer Rising program refers to the Department of Education's summer school program, which is being run by individual schools. We followed up with the Department of Education for details on this, and we're told that as they did in 2020, the DOE will be inviting students to summer programming and continued education in the 2021-2022 school year when it is needed to earn either a diploma or an exit credential. New York City tells us that beginning this month in May, individual schools are notifying eligible students directly. So what this means is that New York City has said that they will allow any student working toward, we're going to take different groups of students in turn, that New York City has said that they will allow students working toward a high school diploma to return. The city has not posted details about this year's policy on their website, but last year, students who were working toward a high school diploma were allowed to return if their principal determined they had enough time to finish diploma requirements. So we would encourage families in this situation to, step one, talk to your high school. So speak to your school about whether your child, given an additional year of school, would be able to meet graduation requirements next year, and ask for permission for your child to return. School districts, principals have received some information from the central office telling them they have permission to allow students to return. If principals or schools are unable to give you to answer your question about whether your child can come back, or if you're told no, you can escalate the issue to one of two places. Any parent can escalate the issue to their superintendent, and following the slides here have a link to contact information for local superintendents. If you have a child with a disability, we would encourage you also to escalate the issue to special education at schools.nyc.gov. At any point in this process, when you run into problems or barriers or have questions, you can contact Advocates for Children at this email address that you see on the screen. So agingout@advocatesforchildren.org is a dedicated inbox to answer questions about this issue. You can also call our helpline. And then, of course, parents of students with disabilities only, which is why there's an asterisk there, if after requesting additional time from your school and escalating the issue to a superintendent or the special education at schools.nyc.gov inbox, after doing those things, if you are still told for some reason that your child cannot return, you could request an impartial hearing. As folks have mentioned, that process can be slow. We have a tip sheet for how parents can make this request themselves. We would really encourage you to reach out to us here at AFC if you are told no and your child falls into this bucket, because we may be able to provide you additional information before you have to move on to the process of filing an impartial hearing. Okay, so the next group of students that we're going to talk about are students with disabilities working toward non-diploma credentials in New York City. So again, the Department of Education has not yet published on their website details about their plans for this year, but the department has told Advocates for Children that for students working toward an exit credential, which generally refers to a SAC or a CDOS, one of the non-diploma credentials, they said that the decision in those instances will be made with parents after considering four things. One, whether the student has met their IEP goals. Two, whether there are signs of regression. Three, whether the student has missed instruction during the pandemic. And four, whether the student is connected with a post-secondary program or service. So what does this mean for parents? If you have a child or you are working with a child whose IEP recommends alternate assessment, or they are through their transition plan working on a SAC or a CDOS credential, these are the indications that your child may be eligible for additional time in school. Last year, there were similar criteria, and all of the criteria did not need to be met. So we would encourage you to point out any IEP goals, including transition goals that your child has not mastered, any signs of regression, any instruction or related services that were either completely or partially missed due to the pandemic. And if your child has not yet been able to either matriculate to a college program or a vocational program, or has not been able to connect with adult services such as OPWDD services or Access VR services because of the pandemic, those would also be important details to point out to your school when advocating for more time with your child, for your child. So here, these are the steps. They're very similar. So for students with disabilities working toward a non-diploma credential, again, first talk to your school. Point out any and all of those indicators that on the previous slide that would suggest why your child needs additional time. Next, because these are all students with disabilities, we would encourage you, if you are unable to get specific information from your school, or if your school tells you that your child is not eligible for more time and you disagree, we would encourage you to escalate that issue to specialeducation@schools.nyc.gov. So shoot that inbox an email. That will take you to central-based special education administrators who may be able to provide you additional information or take a second look at your case. You can at any time, as I said before, reach out to Advocates for Children using the email address in the yellow box or our helpline, and we are very happy to speak to you even after you've spoken to your school. If you'd like to talk to us before the escalation, we're really happy to give you information at that point. You can also loop in your superintendent or copy your superintendent on those communications. But for students with disabilities, we really encourage you to start with that special ed inbox that is listed on the slide. And then finally, if after talking to your school and after escalating to specialeducation@schools.nyc.gov, we don't think it's going to get to this point, but if you continue to disagree with the Department of Ed's determination about whether or not to extend eligibility to your child, you can request an impartial hearing. And again, we have a pretty detailed tip sheet on how to do that pro se or on your own, but we would really like to talk to you if you're considering doing that. So please do email us or call us if you get to the point where you need to file an impartial hearing. Okay, and then finally, the last group of students we want to talk about in New York City is students attending non-public school programs. So as we mentioned, last year, the Department of Education declined to fund placement for students who had aged out and needed to continue in non-public schools. Last year, the city asked non-public schools to identify New York City students who needed more time, but then ultimately declined to actually fund that continued eligibility. This year, we are very pleased to hear that the Department of Education will be accepting reimbursement claims for students in 853 schools, which are approved non-public schools, if they need additional time and are over 21. The Department of Education has not yet published details about this on their website and has not told us the specific criteria that they will use to determine whether students at NPS schools will continue receiving funding. But they have given us some timelines and processes that we'd like to talk through. And we really encourage you that if you're requesting more time to use sort of the same criteria that we've described for DOE students. So what we do know is that the DOE has said that they will be accepting reimbursement claims for students at NPS programs. The DOE, or the Department of Education, a letter should have gone to NPS programs by today, May 21st, asking them to identify students from New York City at their schools who are aging out and who may need more time to either graduate or work toward a non-diploma credential. Those NPS programs need to send the Department of Education names of those students by May 28th. There's a little bit more information requested, including how much more time the program anticipates that the student needs. And then finally, parents, the Department of Education tells us that parents can contact their CSEs directly if they have students or children attending non-public school programs and need additional time. So the steps for this are pretty similar to the previous steps. Step one, if you have a child in a non-public school program who needs more time, is talk to your NPS or your non-public school. Non-public schools should have received a letter from the Department of Education from today, and they should be able to provide information to the DOE to ask for more time. So the first step would be to talk to your NPS and make sure that you're on the same page as the NPS about your child's need for additional time. If you and your NPS don't agree, or you are not confident that the NPS has shared your information with the Department of Education, then you too can reach out directly to your CSE chairperson. We can put a link to the CSE chairperson information in this PowerPoint, and we'll also drop it into the chat. And you should also email specialeducation@schools.nyc.gov if you disagree with the determination of your NPS. And then finally, If you do not hear back, or you hear back by the end of this school year that your child will not be invited to return to their non-public school, again, parents of students with disabilities always have the right to request an impartial hearing when they disagree with a school district's determination regarding the provision of special education services. So again, you could use our tip sheet to do that on your own. But in this instance, especially, we would really like to hear from you directly if you're running into any roadblocks, whether it's at the NPS level or at the Department of Education level. Please do reach out to us. We can provide you with additional information and may be able to also flag your child's case to folks in the Central Special Education Office. So please do use us as a resource if you run into roadblocks in this process. So there's a question, one question in the Q&A, and feel free to submit additional questions if you have them. One question is, if it's optional for districts to provide extended programming, what is the grounds for requesting an impartial hearing? Really alleging a violation of FATE before 21 or less than the denial of extended programming, correct? So yeah, so if it is optional for districts to extend supports just as a blanket program to students who need additional time. Parents with disabilities, as you'll see in our tip sheet, should point out that instances in which their child was not receiving a free appropriate public education due to the pandemic. So many students were transitioned to either remote or hybrid instruction this year, and as such, many students across the city did not receive some or all of the services in their special education program. The schools also, if students were not making progress toward their goals, should have had IEP meetings to meet to revise students' IEPs if they needed a different set of supports in light of the pandemic. And so feel free to give us a call and we can talk more about the details of your child's case. But though the state ed memo is optional, it is not optional whether or not schools provide a free and appropriate public education to students with disabilities. That is an entitlement, and where schools did not do so, even if it was due to the pandemic, those parents have a basis for requesting relief, which can include additional time in school.
Okay, so now we're going to move on to another way that students who are aging out this school year can get supports from the DOE through something called transition consultation. So the DOE has told us that they will continue to offer consultative services via the Transition and College Access Centers, or what I'll now refer to as TCACs, for students who are aging out this year. Really important to note that transition consultation is different from staying for more time in high school. These are kind of additional services that a student can get, and I will go into what they look like in more detail in a second. Last year, the DOE said that students with IEPs who need to be connected with adult or post-secondary services or education, but have otherwise finished high school, could participate in these transition support services, which include, for example, assistance with eligibility applications for certain social services and access to post-school programs and services as needed through the summer and the 2020-2021 school year. Regarding this year, the DOE has not posted details about what services for students who are 21 plus will look like for the 2021-2022 school year, but they have told AFC that transition consultancy services will continue to be offered until a student who is aged out is receiving post-secondary services, whether or not they continue to be enrolled in school, which suggests that students aging out this year will still have access to these transition consultation services. And also important to note, these services offered through TCACs are one-on-one services, so they can be highly individualized. So, in addition to one-on-one supports, answering questions about post-high school life, they can also help students apply to college or vocational programs, fill out Access VR intake protocols and documents, look into and help apply for OPWDD and get documents for eligibility. They can also help review documents, make calls with you, reach out on your behalf to other agencies. And they will provide these services until, or these consultations until those adult services are in place. So we really encourage you to ask for any transition supports that you need. For example, if you're missing an evaluation that you would need to apply for OPWDD, you can reach out to the TCACs to help you get that evaluation. And also keep following up if you need more help. They are there and have said that they will continue to help until those services are in place. So we highly recommend that families, really take advantage of these supports. And I will now get into how you can even access them. So step one, contact information. So reach out to the Transition and College Access Center in your borough. When we share this slide deck, you'll have a link to the different contact info for each TCAC. There is one in each borough. So you can identify the one in the borough that you live, or if your child is still in school, you can identify the one in the borough where your child attends school. If that is unsuccessful, you can escalate to the special education at schools.nyc.gov email address. And if that is unsuccessful, reach out to us at our aging out at advocatesforchildren.org email address to let us know what issues you're having. And you can also call our helpline at the number on this slide if you have additional issues that you would like to troubleshoot or having trouble accessing these consultancy services.
Just want to pause there to see if there are any other questions. I'm not seeing any in the Q&A, but do want to give folks just a second if you have any questions about any of these services from the Department of Education, the New York City Department of Education that we've outlined so far. Okay, so not seeing any questions in the chat, we will move on to a sort of recap and some resources, and then we've got about 15 minutes still remaining, so we will take a few more questions. So do feel free to continue to put those into the chat.
Yeah, so to recap, it's really important that you reach out to your school for more time. If your child needs it, reach out. Your school is your first line to access. We understand that if a student with an IEP isn't offered the extension of services, but the parent feels that it is needed, the parent should discuss it with their school administrator first. If the parent continues to have questions or concerns, they should then email special education at schools.nyc.gov. Families or schools can reach out to their borough transition and college access center, the TCACs, or email Natalie McQueen for students in District 75 as appropriate to access services. This isn't part of AFC's system level advocacy, but AFC has gotten calls from parents with aging out students asking what their legal options are. There are more cases than we can assign attorneys. So we created a tip sheet for families who want to exercise their due process rights and don't know where to start. And so the tip sheet is here and is available to you all.
And then finally, please do call us. We have specialists answering our helpline Monday through Thursday from 10 to 4. Those folks do speak English and many other languages and have access to interpretation services. We also, as I've said before, have a dedicated inbox for concerns regarding extended eligibility or students aging out. So please do reach out to us at agingoutat@advocatesforchildren.org. And just, I see one question in the chat, so we'll just want to share one other resource, a couple of other resources. We have a summary of COVID-19 graduation changes. There have been a number of changes to graduation requirements due to the pandemic, and some of those may affect students with students who would otherwise need more time. So students who were needed only Regents exams, for example, to graduate, may be able to seek waivers to those exams. So there's a link here to Advocates for Children's summary of those graduation changes, along with state guidance and an FAQ from the state about what those mean. So questions, one question is, what is the TCAC's capacity to work with English language learner students or students who speak languages other than English? The students with disabilities who speak languages other than English should be able to receive services in their language, and the TCAC should also be able to provide translation and interpretation services to parents who may speak languages other than English. So if you're working with a family who needs to provide, who needs to speak with the TCAC, and a parent, for example, speaks a language other than English, the TCAC, folks at the TCAC should have access to phone-based interpretation services if they speak a language that's different than the language the student or the parent speak. The TCACs are really focused on students with disabilities, and so they should be able to serve students with disabilities who are also English language learners or multilingual learners, but they are really designed for students with disabilities. Are there any other questions?
So if there are no other questions, we really want to thank you for attending today's webinar. Julia is going to quickly put a link in the chat for a short survey to let us know how we did and if you enjoyed today's presentation, and to help us do better presentations going forward. Again, thank you so much for coming. A recording of today's webinar will be available to you tomorrow, along with a link to today's slides. Again, this process is really complicated, and we gave you quite a bit of information, but you should feel free to reach out to us at any time with questions regarding this process, or with general questions about the education process, but particularly using our agingout@advocatesforchildren.org email address for questions for students who are aging out this year or extended eligibility questions. Thank you again.
Thank you so much. I mean, please do feel free to email us any other questions that you have. And if you contact our helpline with follow-up questions, those calls will also be directed to us. Thanks for joining us. Take care.
Thanks.